Let's clean up this vintage coach hardware. This is part 3 in my series, Rehabbing a Vintage Coach Willis Bag. In this video, I'm going to talk all about the steps that I take to polish up and care for these hardware pieces, which, as you can see in this close-up, for this particular rehab, need a lot of work. And I chose that specifically so that I could show you a wide range of options available to you if you run into any of these issues on your own vintage coach rehab. The hardware on vintage coach bags is solid brass, so Brasso is my go-to product for polishing up the tarnish and getting off the verdigris. I also like to use some tools that I got at the dollar store. These are manicure and makeup tools, the most important being the emery board and the nail buffer. This is a nail brush as well you can use to help you in this process, and then a jewelry polishing cloth. Some other products I've seen people use are Peak and also Sunshine jewelry polishing cloths. Those could work just fine as well. So the first step is going to be assessing your hardware. Like I said, this one has a really bad case of chunked on verdigris that's been left on there for a while. So when it's this thick, you can literally just take a paper towel or a microfiber cloth even and just start rubbing and chunking it off. It's going to come right off. Verdigris is basically a kind of oxidation that occurs when moisture reacts with brass, similar to how you get rust when moisture reacts with steel. So there's really nothing like horrible about it. It might look gross to some people, but you can literally just start chipping it off with any tools you've got on hand. I'm using a soft plastic cuticle pusher here just to start the process to get off all of this thick pasted on verdigris. And you're going to see if it's left on there for a long time, it does tend to stain the metal. Now, I hope no one's freaking out at this point because, like I said, this is a worst case scenario. Most of the time, you won't be dealing with verdigris that bad. Once you get it off, you can get your polishing product onto your pieces of hardware. I'm using this silicone tipped like makeup tool I found at the dollar store. And I just like to get a coating on all the pieces. And with a product like Brasso, the longer you leave it on, the more it will work its magic. Here's another piece that needs some more scraping. I'm just scraping away again at some of the thicker coatings of verdigris here. You can always go back and do that if you find you need to. Then eventually get a nice coating of the product again on all the pieces. And don't worry, you're not getting every single side at the get-go. We are going to go back and take care of that. One thing about the Brasso product is that it smells pretty bad and it's kind of caustic. So if you are sensitive, definitely wear gloves and make sure you're doing this in a well-ventilated area. The longer you leave the Brasso product on the metal, the easier it will be to polish once you rub it off. So make sure you're doing this with time. Don't rush this. Get a nice thick coating on everything. Let it sit for about 2 to 3 minutes. Then grab a cotton pad or paper towel or even a microfiber cloth or even a cotton rag you might have lying around and start wiping the product off, buffing and polishing and rubbing hard as you go. This is what's going to start getting all the tarnish off and any extra verdigris that didn't scrape off in the first part of this process. Here's a very early example of how the product is working. The bottom ring is being polished. The top ring hasn't been worked on yet. You can see there's a really clear difference between the shine on each of these pieces, and we're not even close to done yet. So go ahead and grab each piece that you need to work on and repeat this process. Again, take your time. I like to work on this while my bag is drying from step 2, which you all saw in part 2 of this video series where we bathe the vintage coach bag. While my bag is drying, I will go ahead and work on the hardware because that process does take up to 48 hours. So this is a nice little like sit down in the evening, relax, put on a movie, put on your favorite TV show. You're going to be working on this for a while, but it's going to be worth it. Once you go through, flip everything, coat it again with another application of the Brasso product, and then leave it for 2 to 3 minutes and then go to town again, buffing and rubbing with your cotton rag or pad or whatever you're using. And at the end, you should have something that looks like this. Don't forget, if you have a strap on a style that you're working on, to do any permanently attached pieces like buckles or rings. This particular bag has a permanently attached buckle, so I went back and did that. Now, sometimes just polishing the pieces with Brasso is more than enough, and that's usually the case. But with this, we have a pitted and chipped finish on a lot of the pieces. We also have stains from the verdigris where some of the pieces were heavily coated with verdigris for a long time. So in this next step, we're going to tackle this process. Use your emery board or your nail buffer if that's what you have. Again, these are widely available at like dollar stores, and start buffing away at all the different surfaces of each piece of hardware. I'm doing half of this grommet so that you guys can see what the process looks like and also compare the difference between done and not done. So I'm using different sides of the nail buffer here and the emery board, and typically you want to go from your heaviest sandpaper, for lack of a better term, to your lightest. Here you can see we've got, again, the heavy staining from verdigris. I'm going to use my emery board, which is typically as heavy as you really should be going. I know that you can get sandpaper from hardware stores and also use that. People always ask me, like, what grit do I use? But what I've found is that a basic emery board with the red and tan sides works the best. Like, you really don't need to go any heavier than that red side of the emery board. And then the tan side is like slightly finer. And then I move on to my nail buffer, which has like a numbered 1 through 4 sides, 1 being the grittiest and 4 being the smoothest for buffing. And so I continue to just rub all sides of the hardware piece with number 1, and then I move on to number 2, and then I move on to number 3, and then eventually I buff it out with number 4. And then if you really want to go for the shine, you can buff it out again with a jewelry polishing cloth. But you want to consistently move through the same formula of heaviest grit to smoothest grit for each piece. And that friction is what's going to clear up those stains and is going to buff out any other issues, scratches, verdigris. It's all going to come out in this buffing process. Now, I can hear some of you thinking, but isn't she scratching up the hardware? Yes, absolutely. 100% we are scratching up the hardware with the grit that is on the emery board. And then we are slowly lowering the grit until it becomes a buffer. That is the formula. That is the plan. This is a process of scratching out all the imperfections and then buffing it smooth and shiny once again. Depending on your goals for your bag rehab project, you might have different levels of comfortability of things that you're willing to do and not willing to do, and that's totally okay. Stick with what works for you and your project. I'm sharing with you guys everything that I've learned on my own self-taught journey to rehabbing vintage Coach bags, which I started on because they flip so well and I love flipping them for a profit. I also love finding some of the most desperate looking beat up bags and completely transforming them and putting them back into circulation. You might want to do that. You might just want to collect them and use them for yourself. I'm just showing you guys solutions that are out there if you decide to work on a bag and you run into some of these issues with the hardware. But if I can do this, anyone can do this. And remember, each bag is going to have a different condition and a different need. So here you can see a buffed out ring. It looks super clean and shiny. And in comparison, this top ring has only been cleaned of tarnish and verdigris, but the bottom ring has now also been polished and it's really night and day. So I'm going to go ahead and repeat that process on all the pieces of hardware that I think need it. So I'm going to do all the rings, all the bars, and the turn lock. The pieces on the strap look really good, so I'm not going to touch those. And you might need to make similar decisions for your project. Not all hardware needs to go through this process. You might have a really lovely, even dark patina on all your hardware, and you want to keep that, and that's totally fine. You don't need to do everything that I'm doing. You may need to do some of the things that I'm doing, depending on the condition and the needs of the bag. Again, I intentionally picked this hardware that needed a lot of TLC so you guys could see what the steps of the process are and the results, and then also decide for yourself what you're going to need if you run into any of these issues. Here is the finished hardware. I think it looks incredible. Subscribe, like, and follow if you enjoyed this content and want to support it. Stay tuned for part 4 where we talk about additional cleaning and conditioning of the bag, and we continue to complete this entire rehab process little by little. I appreciate you guys so much. Thanks for watching and happy thrifting.